Okay, awesome. Well, we'll let people come in and we'll get started, and they can come in fashionably late as they want to. But hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Kerfoot. I'm the Deputy Director of Events at Politics and Prose Bookstore, and I would like to welcome you all to tonight's P&P Live. I have got my cocktail in hand. I hope you all do too, because it's Friday, so why not? I'm going to go over a couple housekeeping items before we start the event. So first, I'm going to drop a link in the chat very soon where you can purchase your copy of Shake, Strain, Done right from P&P's website. And if you live in the DC area and you don't feel like waiting for shipping, you can actually pick the book up at any of our 3 store locations, Northwest, The Wharf, and Union Market. And these make literally the perfect holiday gift. So if you have a cocktail lover in your life, or somebody that you just don't know what to get them, maybe someone who recently moved is a great housewarming gift. These are perfect. They're a great size. They're literally perfect for anyone who likes to drink. So grab one of those. You can also ask our author a question throughout the event. Don't be shy. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen, and you can click on that and then just put your question right there, and we will answer the questions kind of as we go along. So feel free to do that. And then the chat is open. So let us know where you're coming from and what you're drinking and what your plans are tonight for this Friday in. We would love to hear from you. I'll make sure the chat is able. Yeah, it's enabled. All right, so it is now my pleasure to introduce J.M. Hirsch, a James Beard Award-winning food and travel writer and author of course, tonight's book. He is editorial director of Christopher Kimball's Milk Street, a Boston-based food company, and his previous cookbooks include High Flavor, Low Labor and Beating the Lunchbox Blues. What I love about Shake, Strain, Done is that so many cocktail books that I own have recipes that are like vodka, okay, check. Bitters, all right, I got that. And then you need to fly to Italy and find a town outside of Sicily that is not found on a map, find a brick house hidden behind a forest, and ask for the secret ingredient of a 100-year-old fermented tomato. And so it's like, you can't find those ingredients anywhere. You're never going to use them again. But this book doesn't do that. It has ingredients that you can get literally just about anywhere. And the recipes don't have 20 plus steps to them. You can make the drinks easily in practically no time. You can make them for just yourself or for your friends whenever we're all allowed to gather again. So that's what I love about it, is just the simplicity and ease of it. So without further ado, please help me welcome J.N. Hirsch to P&P Live, and cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you so much. Wow, you kind of nailed it for me. I mean, that is exactly why and how I wrote this book. So, as you said, I'm the editorial director for Christopher Kimball's Milk Street. And this, by the way, is the part where everybody hates me, because my job entails traveling the world and eating and drinking. That's what I do. Along the way, one of my favorite things is to check out the best bars in every city. And I love sitting at the bar and, frankly, interrogating the bartenders for hours, because I love an amazing cocktail. I love a craft cocktail. And I like to learn what it is that separates the cocktails that they make from the stuff that we might make at home. What is it that elevates it to a craft cocktail rather than just whatever I slosh into a glass at home? And, it's fascinating, but as you say, it's also very frustrating, because too often, the ingredients they use are obscure or esoteric or ungodly expensive, or the techniques they use just aren't practical at home. And so for me, it was really important when I approached this book to figure out a way to make craft quality cocktails at home with the ingredients that most of us have, with the liquors that most of us are likely to find, and with techniques that we can all master. Because I find too many cocktail recipes are written by mixologists for mixologists, and that leaves the rest of us kind of scratching our heads, or scrambling around trying to find obscure ingredients that we're never going to use again and don't even know what it tastes like when we buy it. So I can continue to babble on, and frankly, I will. However, it is important. This is a cocktail class, cocktail discussion. So we are going to make a cocktail right off the bat, because I hate standing here without a glass in my hand. So the first cocktail we're going to make is called a liquid crystal. And what I love about this is it kind of captures the essence of one of the techniques that those high-end bartenders use to make their cocktails so much better than what we do. And that what they do is they are unafraid of chasing flavor. They chase it in directions that most of us at home would never consider going in for a cocktail. And that's one of the things I love about them. They not only chase them in unexpected directions, they combine them in unexpected ways. So the liquid crystal gets its flavor from fennel seeds, from the spice cabinet. Now, I chose fennel seeds because a lot of those obscure liquors that we've been mentioning often have an anise or a black licorice flavor to them. And there's a reason for that. That kind of bitter black licorice flavor is really good at balancing sweetness and sour flavors and citrus, and it kind of rounds out a cocktail. Now, you could go out and hunt down those obscure liquors that offer this anise flavor, or you can grab the fennel seeds out of your spice cabinet, and that's generally what I do. So we're gonna make the liquid crystal. Now, don't worry if like black licorice isn't your favorite flavor. In this cocktail, it's kind of a background note that, again, kind of rounds out. This is a rum cocktail, so it rounds out kind of the natural sweetness of the rum and kind of elevates the drink with that kind of background, something that you kind of can't quite put your finger on, but you know it's there and you know it's lovely. So what we're gonna do is we're going to take a half a teaspoon of whole fennel seeds, put them right into our cocktail shaker. Then we're going to use about a 1/4 ounce of either agave syrup or honey. And I use agave syrup in place of simple syrup because it's neutral, it mixes well, it mixes just as well as simple syrup, in fact, and it's easier than making simple syrup, frankly. So in order to get the flavor out of all those fennel seeds, we need to muddle it. So we're going to grab our muddler and we're just going to lightly bash them. We don't want to crush them into oblivion. That's not what you do when you muddle. The point is simply to break them up and release their flavor. So I'm going to break them up a little bit. That looks good. Now, we're going to leave the muddler in the shaker. Why? Because you see all that gunk on the bottom? That's called flavor. And we want that in our cocktail, not stuck on our muddler. So we're going to grab our rum and grab our measuring cup. And we're going to put in 2½ ounces of white rum. There. And, oh, that's closer to 3 ounces, but that's all right. It'll be good either way. I do tend to like a boozy cocktail. That's one thing you're going to learn tonight. And I don't want to say the boozier the better, but the boozier the better. And then we're going to throw in a 1/4 ounce of ginger liqueur. I love flavored liqueurs because they add both sweetness and flavor. And ginger liqueur in particular adds a really bright peppery note to kind of whatever you add it to. And it works really well with kind of this balancing the sweetness of the rum. All right, so we have our liquids in there. Now we're going to swish our muddler around, rinse it off. There we go. Flavor's gone. Well, it's not gone, it's in the cup. All right, now we're going to add our ice. Give it a good shake. Usually 5 to 7 seconds is plenty. What we're doing, we're not just chilling it, we're not just diluting it, we're also crushing the ice a little bit in the process of shaking it. And some of those ice crystals are going to end up in our drink, and those are going to further chill and dilute the drink as we drink. All right, now, we crushed those seeds lightly. We don't want those seeds in the finished drink. So we're going to double strain this cocktail. Now, this is a cobbler style shaker, which means it has a strainer built into the top, but the holes in that cobbler style strainer are too large. They're not going to capture those seeds. So we use a mesh cocktail strainer to catch all those little bits because those would be kind of yucky in the finished cocktail. And we strain our drink in. We're using a coupe glass. There we go. Okay. Now, the finishing flourish for this drink is a splash of sparkling wine. Half the time when I open these, they splash all over me. I got lucky this time. And by the way, I know that the best Prosecco is not bottled in single serve containers like this. However, these are perfect for cocktails. You don't want to use high-end Prosecco anyway for a cocktail. But this is also perfect because you don't have to open a whole bottle just to finish off cocktail with a splash like that. And that is how you make the liquid crystal. It's going to have herbal, spicy notes, but it's also going to be kind of clean and refreshing at the same time. And you're going to get that very hint of anise in the background. Mm, that is perfect. Cheers. So that is the liquid crystal, a very simple cocktail that has complex flavors. So when I set out to write this book, and knowing that I wanted to capture that kind of craft essence in home friendly cocktails, I realized I had to have some parameters for how I approached it. The first one is I needed the book to work within a limited repertoire of liquors. You know, we go to these high-end bars and they have 30 gins, 100 whiskeys, 20 brandies, for us to choose from, or for them to choose from when crafting the perfect cocktail. Well, that's lovely, and that's why we pay them 15 to 20 bucks a cocktail. Doesn't work at home. Most of us don't have that number of bottles. So I wanted to work with a core repertoire of liquors from which you could make hundreds of cocktails. The second thing is I wanted to focus on simple techniques, techniques that we can all use. I mean, nothing we're going to do here tonight is complicated or difficult. Likewise, I wanted to focus on common equipment that we can all get, we can all keep on hand, and doesn't cost a lot of money. The beauty of this hobby, and we're going to call it a hobby, it's not a problem, it's a hobby. The beauty of this hobby is that you can equip a home bar for about 40 bucks. It's not it's not a big investment, and you can make any cocktail with that equipment. The final parameter, and for me the most important, was that I wanted to kind of craft a language around cocktails that you can taste. I wanted to use a language that we can taste, because much like those esoteric ingredients that you have to hunt down in the backwoods of Italy, too often these recipes, and even actually, frankly, the menu descriptions of cocktails, are written in a language that doesn't help us understand what's going to be in the glass. If you see a cocktail that calls for creme de violette and Benedictine and burdock root bitters, what is that going to taste like? Most of us don't know, and it's not very helpful. It doesn't help us understand whether we want that beverage, or whether we're going to enjoy it, or whether it's related to something that we already know we like. And so the more I thought about this, I realized that there are some core characteristics that when you cluster them together in different formations, you can describe pretty much any cocktail. And I realized that those characteristics fall on a spectrum of flavor. You start at one end with refreshing and sweet and creamy, and then you kind of progress to spicy, sour, and bitter. And you progress to the far end where you're getting like strong and warm characteristics. And these are terms that we can taste. When you describe a cocktail as refreshing, sweet, and sour, you know what to expect from the glass. And so it was really important to me that every cocktail in this book be described in those sorts of terms. And because then, well, do I want to try this or not? Well, I like, sweet and refreshing and sour cocktails. And that makes it easier. Beyond that, though, it also makes it easier to understand the relations between cocktails, because, why just drink one cocktail? I mean, when you can explore all sorts of cocktails that you like, if you like a refreshing sweet and sour cocktail, well, perhaps you'll also like one that's refreshing sweet and bitter, or refreshing sweet and strong. The idea is that if we have a common language that we can taste, that is meaningful to us in the way we experience food and drink, then we're better able to appreciate what's going to be in the glass long before we ever grab a bottle. And then once we know what we like, we're better able to explore other cocktails that might be related to it. So that was kind of my thinking when I came at this book. It was really important to me that we be able to approach these cocktails and approach cocktail making in a way that just works at home. I mean, let's face it, I obviously did not write this book with the pandemic in mind, but the work for it started long before that. But, we are all drinking at home now. And I don't feel like whenever we're drinking at home, pandemic or otherwise, we should have to sacrifice the quality of the drinks that we are enjoying. So yeah, so I'm going to drink my liquid crystal, and I am happy to answer any questions.
All right, I'm going to read some questions out to you here because we've gotten a few in the chat.
Excellent.
So, let's see. Well, Rob actually asked me, Brittany, what are you drinking tonight? This is actually my nighttime mimosa.
Oh, I love a good nighttime mimosa. So my Thanksgiving tradition actually is I get up, I always get up at the crack of dawn, and especially on Thanksgiving, my mimosas start very early, and the mimosas carry me straight through cooking Thanksgiving and right into the bourbon that I serve with Thanksgiving.
Nice. Yeah, this one has a splash of orange juice, but also a splash of orange liqueur, which I normally don't do.
Oh, nice, nice. That's
So,
very good. And then next time, add just a dash of bitters to it. You could
yeah.
use orange bitters, or Angostura bitters would be perfect as well.
Oh yeah, that's a very
Rounds it out a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So Lola Adams asks, what are the essential bar tools everyone should have on their cart or in their kitchen for cocktail mixing?
Okay, so in terms of tools, it's actually pretty limited. That's why I say it doesn't cost very much, and you could actually do it for less than $40. So you need a cocktail shaker. I am a big fan of the cobbler style cocktail shaker. The Boston style cocktail shaker is when you have two cups and you insert them like that. I find that a pain in the butt to use. They are difficult to seal, and then they're difficult to unseal, and I tend to splash it everywhere. I find a cobbler style works much better. I in particular love this cobbler style, which is a screw top, and so it doesn't come off when you least expect it. It also has a silicone seal in it, which keeps everything nice and tight. So I love this one. But there are various brands that sell screw top cobbler style shakers. I love those. You need a shaker. You need a stirring glass, which is over here. A stirring glass, but you could also use, I mean, again, you don't have to spend a lot of money. You could use a 2-cup liquid measuring cup in place of a stirring glass. You need a muddler, which I showed you before, to lightly crush ingredients. You need jiggers. Now, I use the OXO style measuring cup jigger. I love these because they're easy to use. They have clear demarcations on the inside. It's very easy to use, very easy to pour. I'm not a big fan of, do I even have them? Yeah, I do. I'm not a big fan of the bar style jiggers. I find them very difficult to use, easy to spill, and I don't like those at all. I find these are much more intuitive. What else do you need? Boy, that is kind of your core equipment. For crushed ice, I'll talk about this later, but I love a Lewis bag and an ice mallet. But if your refrigerator makes crushed ice, you can get away with that. You don't actually need it, but I do love it. A good a Hawthorne strainer is for when you use a stirring glass, and that's how you strain out, because you don't need that with the cobbler style because it's got the shaker built into it. But I mean, these cost like $3 or $4 online. What else do you need? Not a whole lot, really. That's about it. I mean, if you want to get fancy, you can get I think I have one in here. There we go, a channel knife. And that's for ripping strips of zest off of citrus, and then you can make garnishes that way. And you do need, I used it earlier, mesh cocktail strainer. And that is for when the strainer holes in the cobbler style shaker are too large to catch the bits and pieces. And it's not just when you use seeds. A lot of times if you're, for example, if you're muddling fruit or pulpy fruit into a cocktail like raspberries, which have lots of seeds, or strawberries, and it's the cobbler style strainer is not going to catch all that, and you don't want all those little seeds and bits and pieces in your drink. A mesh cocktail strainer kind of helps you. And that's really it. I mean, that's pretty much all you need. And you can get all of that for $25, $30 if you want to go on the cheap end. If you want to splurge on some of those items, you can spend $40, $50. And that's about it, really.
Nice. I mean, that's not bad to outfit your whole bar cart or bar area.
Exactly. That's what I love about this hobby is, I mean, the booze itself, of course,
Right.
kind of, changes the equation a little bit, but the actual equipment, you don't need much. And, truth be told, if you really want to, save money, you don't get a cobbler style shaker, although you can get them for like $7 or $8. You could use 2 cups, a metal cup and a glass cup, and make a Boston style shaker out of that. And you just got to be very careful as you do it. And otherwise, you're going to end up wearing your cocktail instead of drinking it. So.
Nice. All right. Let's see. Oh, here's an interesting question. Denise Townsend says, weird question, but does anyone know where the name cocktail came from? I get the visual of a chicken feather and it's weird.
That's an excellent question to which I do not have the answer. I know that cocktails are uniquely American.
Mm.
Well, I shouldn't say uniquely because they're no longer uniquely American, but they began in the US. And there is some debate about that because France has had cocktail-like concoctions for quite a while as well. But generally speaking, the United States is credited with creating the cocktail as we know it. I may be speaking out of turn here because I don't know this history perfectly, but I do believe that a lot of the French cocktails were more aperitif style and wine-based concoctions, whereas in the United States, the hard liquor cocktail as we know it was born. And but that's a really good question, and kind of the origins of the word itself. I'm gonna have to look that up. I haven't been asked that before, and now I need to know.
If anyone's Googling on the side and you find the answer, put it in that. Okay, you want one more before you move on to another one?
Sure.
Okay, let's see. This person says, is there a substitute for orange bitters? Can you leave it out in the cinnamon toast drink if you don't have a replacement?
Absolutely. So I'll give you my whole spiel about bitters in general. I love bitters. And the reason I love bitters is, especially today versus like 10 or 15 years ago, bitters are the essence of a flavor. And so what they allow you to do is change the flavor profile of a cocktail, regardless of what the other ingredients are. You're able to change the flavor profile of a cocktail without changing either the sweetness of the cocktail or the acidity of the cocktail or the volume of the cocktail. So for example, orange bitters are a great place to start. If I wanted to add orange flavor to a cocktail and I used either orange juice or I muddled in a wedge of fresh orange, no matter what, I'm going to be necessarily changing the sweetness, the acidity, and the volume of that cocktail. And now that might not be a bad thing, but if I don't want to do that, if I just want to add the essence of orange to it, bitters allow me to add that orange essence without changing all those other characteristics of the cocktail. The beauty of bitters, as I said, is that nowadays they come in a million different flavors. I have probably 50 or 60 different bitters in my refrigerator, celery, rhubarb, peach, apricot, chocolate. And you can play with those, and the old fashioned, which is one of my daily drinks, is a great cocktail where you can play with bitters and really play around with flavors and change up the experience of the cocktail. So for cinnamon toast, if you don't have orange bitters, I would use Angostura bitters, which are probably the most common bitter.
Yeah.
You could use Peychaud's bitters, which have a slightly more herbal kind of note to them, a little bit more anise to them, which would still be delicious. My favorite, I think, if I was going to lose the orange, would be chocolate bitters. I think chocolate and cinnamon would go wonderfully together. I think that would be a delicious cocktail. I haven't tried it, and now I want to. And in fact, will you grab me I'm telling my husband off camera, can you grab me the chocolate bitters, please? I'm going to do it with chocolate now that the question came up. And because it's, again, it's so easy. Thank you. It's so easy to play around with flavor profiles, without changing all the other elements. And by the way, speaking of bitters, so you'll see that these are not in the bottles that you buy them in. These dropper bottles you can buy online for, I don't know, I think I paid $5 or $6 for a dozen of them or something. And I love to transfer my bitters from those stupid shaker bottles that you buy them in into these. I don't know. It must be a skill I don't have, but those shaker bottles, I always end up like either getting nothing or the entire bottle into my cocktail. And so the first thing I do is I pop off that stupid little cap that comes in the bottle and I decant them into dropper bottles. And because you can control so much more easily how much of the bitters you actually add to the cocktail. So with all that said, let's make a cinnamon toast. So this is a gin-based cocktail. And what I love about this cocktail is that it's a case of the finished cocktail being so much more than the sum of the parts would suggest. It's a 4-ingredient cocktail. It's gin, it's sugar, it's bitters, and it's ground cinnamon, and that's it. And I love that the end result tastes so much like the name of the cocktail. It tastes like you are enjoying buttery cinnamon toast in the morning, and that's just a wonderful thing. So this is a gin cocktail, and I prefer to use a London dry gin for mixed cocktails because when you get into the Genever and the Old Tom gins, they're going to have nuances that tend to get lost in most cocktails. I'm not saying there aren't cocktails that don't use them. They can be very good in a cocktail, but for most gin cocktails, London dry is just right. So I'm going to go with 3 ounces of gin because this is the only source of booze in this drink. And like I said, I do like a boozy cocktail. There we go. That's 3 ounces. All right. And then to that, I'm going to add about 1/4 ounce of agave or simple syrup. I do think people tend to over-sweeten their cocktails. Most of my cocktails don't use more than 1/4 of an ounce. Some use 1/2 ounce, depending on what the other ingredients are. But I try to keep them to about 1/4 of an ounce. There's a reason for that. A little bit of sugar goes a long way in kind of heightening and rounding out the other flavors. But if you add too much, it dulls those other flavors. So you're actually being very counterproductive. All right, so you know what, as I'm talking, I'm realizing that orange and chocolate go amazing together. So this is going to be an orange chocolate cinnamon toast. I'm going to use both, but you could use either. So I'm going to do a little bit of orange bitters, and then I'm going to use a little bit of chocolate bitters. I've never done this before, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be damn amazing. All right, and then just a little bit of ground cinnamon. There we go. It doesn't take much in a cocktail, especially with something as strong as cinnamon. There we go. There we go. Perfect. And put that right in. And that's it. Now, before we can mix this cocktail, however, we need a little bit of therapy. It's been a tough year, tough few weeks. So we're going to set aside our cocktail, and we're going to get our mallet and our Lewis bag, which is just a canvas bag. And this is the old school way of making crushed ice. You throw your ice cubes into the Lewis bag. There we go. And then fold it over, and you work out all of your issues. I mean, it's like the election didn't even happen now. So we take our crushed ice, and we're going to do this in a cocktail glass. And we're going to fill it about halfway with crushed ice. That should do it. And then we can mix our drink. Now, we didn't want to mix our cocktail beforehand because the whole time we were crushing our ice, the ice in the cocktail shaker would have been melting and diluting the drink. And dilution is important, but you don't want too much dilution. So we're going to give that a good shake. And then we're going to strain it into our cocktail glass. And there we go. And that is our cinnamon toast. Cheers. Let's see how it is with both bitters. Oh, that's really good. I should have done that a long time ago. That's really nice. I mean, orange and chocolate love each other. And then you put it on cinnamon toast. I mean, it's perfect.
That looks so good. I'm gonna have to try that variation. Somebody here said that they are drinking the cinnamon toast because we posted 3 of the recipes on our Instagram. So if you guys want to go and you want a preview of the book, go to Politics Pros on Instagram, and we've got a post. But this leads into some great questions. I'm getting a lot of questions about using the dropper bottles and bitters. So a couple people, twofold question. 1, do they have to be refrigerated? All of them. And 2, how much of a dropper would you say is like a dash of bitters? How many drops would that be?
Oh, that's a good question. So the first question, I kind of know the answer to. I used to keep my bitters at room temperature. And then a chef who I have a deep, deep respect for scolded me for this. And she told me that yes, technically they are safe at room temperature, and they're not going to go bad, but they are fresher when refrigerated. And especially when you consider the speed at which you go through bitters, which is not very fast. Well, maybe in my house, I do tend to go through quite a lot of them, but most people don't. And so when you consider how long they tend to kick around, they stay fresher if you leave them in the refrigerator. So I do refrigerate mine. Do you need to? Absolutely not. It's kind of a personal choice. But like I say, I have 50 or 60 different bitters in my refrigerator. And even at the rate that I go through them, I can't go through that many bottles that quickly. So it is best to refrigerate them if you think they're going to kick around for a while. In terms of the amount, a dash would probably be, so these are the orange bitters. I would say a dash would be, are you able to see that? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I would
not
say
quite
it's
half the dropper, probably.
And I would say it's half of that would be
Okay.
a dash.
Okay.
And it's probably amounts to 2 or 3 drops from a dropper. So here's why I hate those dash bottles, because you never actually just get a dash. I've never been able to do that, and maybe I'm just incompetent, but when I shake that, I always get a splurt, 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 no matter how many times I shake it. That was awful, wasn't it? Anyway, you get more than you anticipate. And so that's why I like the dropper balls, because you have a lot more control over it. And I also think that bitters are a very personal choice. You get used to the level of bitters that you like in your cocktails. So for example, I am an old fashioned drinker, and I like a fair amount of bitters in my cocktail for that. And so I put probably 3 or 4 drops of, hefty drops into an old fashioned, because especially if I'm making a rye old fashioned, which has those, kind of stronger peppery notes. I want to balance that with whatever flavor I'm going with from the bitters. And so, but you don't want to overwhelm it either. So it is a personal taste. I would say that using a dropper bottle gives you greater control in terms of determining what your taste is. You can start with a drop, taste it. The beauty of bitters is you can start slow. Make your cocktail, and even if it's a shaken cocktail, make your cocktail without bitters. Shake it, strain it into the glass, taste it, add a drop of bitters, taste it. Want more? Add another drop, stir it in, and then taste it again. You can bring it up to the level that you like. It's a great way to explore flavor and flavor combinations and determine your own personal taste. And it's going to vary based on not just the flavor of bitters that you use, but also the brand of bitters that you use. I did a tasting 3 or 4 years ago of probably 7 or 8 different orange bitters alone. And they were all delicious, but they all had varying kind of degrees of intensity. And so, depending on what you buy, taste your way into it and see what you like. I think that's the best way.
A question in the chat, and this kind of goes along with what you're saying. When you're serving a group, how do you manage mixing that many at a time? And it seems like also if people have maybe different preferences on how strong it is, or how much bitters you put in. What are your tips for mixing for a group rather than just making one cocktail at a time?
Well, so there's a couple of ways to approach that. The first is you can get a shaker that is more sizable like this, and you can mix easily. You could probably, depending on the cocktail, you could probably get 3 or 4 cocktails into this and shake it without too much trouble. And the quote downside of that, of course, would be that they're all going to be the same. If people have different tastes, one, you got to ask them. Tell me in advance. I don't like bitters in my cocktails, or I don't like sour. I am someone who I don't like strong lemon in a cocktail, or in most cocktails. Tequila is different, but in most other cocktails, like I don't like whiskey sours, and so I would never ask for a cocktail that has lemon and whiskey in it. And I think first is to know your audience. And the second is, if everybody's the same, just get a big shaker or get multiple shakers. Again, they're pretty cheap, so you can do multiple shakers. The other way to do it is to mix your base ingredients and then let people customize it in their glass. So for example, if we were doing the cinnamon toast, you could use a mixing glass instead of a shaker. Now, there is an important difference, of course, between mixing and shaking, and that is the degree of dilution and the degree of chill. When you make a cocktail in a stirring glass, you are essentially combining the ingredients with ice in a stirring glass, and then you're stirring it around. You are not being as aggressive with the ice. And so therefore, it's not getting chilled quite as much, and it's not getting diluted quite as much. And you're not getting those ice particles that result, that end up in the final drink. Just keep that in mind. You could, however, make your base cocktail. You could, for example, for the cinnamon toast, take the gin and the agave or simple syrup and the cinnamon and stir it in this glass, then with the ice, and then strain it. Use the Hawthorne strainer and strain it into individual glasses, and then let people add bitters to taste. If you think the bitters are the issue, you could let them add bitters to taste. You could also let them sweeten it to taste. Instead of, if sweetness is the factor, you could mix the gin, the bitters, and the cinnamon and strain it into, in that case, I would not use a cocktail glass. I would use a rocks glass because it's a little bit easier to work with. And then give each person, the agave or the simple syrup, and let them sweeten it to taste. I am obviously, like I said, I'm very sensitive to overly sweetened cocktails because I feel like it blows out the other flavors that you're trying to appreciate in a cocktail. And so, but you could let them sweeten it to taste in the glass. Again, I would change the glassware just to make it easier for them to stir it together. You wouldn't want to stir this. And so, there are ways to customize it, but I think the only way to know how to customize it is to know what the sensitivities are, so to speak. On the other hand, if it's not a case of sensitivities, if it's just a case of trying to mix cocktails for a group, I'm actually having a socially distant, safe gathering outside my yard tomorrow evening. And, of course, I don't want to be mixing cocktails for even a handful of people, and nor should they want to take those cocktails from me. And so, thank you. And so what I've done is make a batch of cocktails in advance. And I made a whole lot of cocktail tonight, and I put it in these, individual single serve bottles that people can grab on their own and help themselves with. And that's a great way of doing it. And I will say that virtually any cocktail, there's probably 10% of the cocktail world that can't be done in advance like that. I mean, is it going to be the same experience? Of course not. This is a cocktail that I normally serve in either a coupe glass or a wine glass, and this isn't obviously either of those. And so the experience is a little bit different. But most cocktails can be prepped in advance. In the case of this, it's a mixture of bourbon and ginger liqueur and what else did I put in there? Liqueur 43, which is a vanilla spice liqueur, and some bitters. And I put a little bit of ice in there, and I stirred it. I put less ice than I would have put if I was shaking the cocktail, because I intentionally made the ice dissolve entirely into the cocktail, because there wasn't going to be any other ice added at any point. And so I wanted to dilute it to the point that it normally would dilute. Oh yeah, there was also apple cider in there. And I wasn't going to add further ice or to dilute it any further after it was in the bottle, obviously. So I wanted to use a very limited and controlled amount of ice that I fully melted into the cocktail itself. And then I just, poured it into these bottles. And that's a great way, especially in this time that we're living through, to serve, more than a couple of people in a safe and, respectable way. And the rules of the game have changed a lot, this year. The things we didn't think we would have to think about.
Exactly. Someone in the chat said that is brilliant, and I have to agree. That's not something I would have ever thought of, but that's a really great
yeah. It's so actually I can't take credit for the idea. I had something like this at a bar in Mexico City, where they were doing it for kind of the shtick of it, where the cocktail was served in a glass flask. um, ever so slightly offensively wrapped in a paper bag. And I think it was supposed to be a quote hobo experience, but we'll set that aside for the moment. I did like the idea of the glass flask though. And so I thought that was kind of brilliant because it is a single serve option. And these days it's perfect, you know, and again, most cocktails can be made in advance. You just have to, the only thing you have to factor is the ice. You know, like normally if you would serve a drink on ice, that ice that you serve it on is playing an important role. It is going to continue to chill, of course, the drink, but it's more importantly going to continue to dilute the drink. And since you're not going to do that, you want to kind of pre-dilute the drink, if that makes any sense, you know, before you bottle it. So you add the ice that you think it's going to need. And, you know, the good thing is start with just a little bit of ice. And this is what I did this evening. I started with a little bit of ice. I stirred it until it melted. I tasted it. And I thought, needs a little bit more ice, needs a little bit more bourbon, whatever. Play with the proportions until you get it right, and then you bottle it. And the beauty is that now there's no more ice going into it. It's static, and that drink's not going to change. So you got an easy drink to serve to a crowd.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Okay, before I let you make another one, we do have a web sleuth who looked up the origin of the word cocktail.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this. Okay,
yeah.
Good.
So, and I'm going to butcher this. I don't speak French. I speak Spanish, and there are a lot of French words, so forgive me. But Jane says Google's answer to the origin of the word cocktail is another popular story comes from New Orleans, where an apothecary by the name of Peychaud of Bitters fame served a mixed brandy drink in a French egg cup. Eventually, the drink was named coquetier, the French term for an egg cup. And then this person's guest shortened it to cocktail, and eventually it became cocktail.
Seems believable. I have heard versions of that story before. I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but it seems plausible to me. I mean, certainly the language was at play down there, and I think that's as good as any other answer.
Yeah, I'm going with it. I like that answer.
All right, I will make another cocktail. This cocktail is the apple cream pie. And this is going to be the creamiest, most rich, most luscious and comforting, perfect autumnal cocktail that you will ever have. It's just amazing. Now, normally I make it with vodka, but since I've already done 2 other clear liquor cocktails, you can also make it with bourbon, and I am a bourbon drinker, so I'm going to make it with bourbon. So I'm going to start with 2 ounces of bourbon in my shaker. You could also make this with rye if you kind of wanted that pepperiness to it. That'd be good too. And then I'm going to add 1.5 ounces of fresh apple cider. There we go. Perfect. And then I'm going to add 1/2 ounce of liqueur 43, which I mentioned before is a Spanish liqueur. It adds a lovely gentle sweetness and kind of vanilla spice notes. And, you know, every bottle that I chose to include in my book, really, it was very important to me that it kind of earn its keep. And so every liqueur in particular had to offer something, bring something to the table that other liquors don't. And so, you know, vanilla spice is not something you see in too many liqueurs. Similarly, ginger is a very distinctive flavor that you can do so much with. Orange liqueur is another one that made it. Benedictine is another one because it's made with like 27 herbs and botanicals. Brings a lot to the table that you don't get elsewhere. So to me, it's very important if you're going to include a liquor in a book like this, it has to really earn its keep. All right, the magic ingredient to this one is the one that wigs everybody out, and that is egg whites. Everybody assumes that they're going to be slimy in the cocktail. They're not. They're going to be foamy, they're going to be creamy, they're going to be frothy, they're going to be delicious. It's going to add a lovely viscosity to this cocktail. They will not be slimy, I promise you. The proteins in the egg whites emulsify, and it creates this foamy, creamy consistency. They're lovely. The other part about egg whites that kind of wig people out is, well, they are raw eggs, and it's a food safety question. That's why I used carton egg whites, which are pasteurized. So they are safe to consume raw. The other thing about carton egg whites, though, is that they mix much better in a cocktail than a freshly cracked egg. I don't know why that is, but I find that carton egg whites emulsified much better, much more smoothly. You don't get that kind of weird eggy bits. They just mix into the cocktail so much better, and they're safe, and they're creamy, and they're lovely. So give them a good shake. They also last forever. They're so much easier to measure. So I'm going to add a 1/2 ounce of egg whites. There we go. And then the other magic ingredient in this cocktail is something we all have on hand. And this is one of those high-end tricks, tips, techniques that transforms cocktails, and none of us would think of it necessarily at home, and that is salt. So when we think of salt in a cocktail, we think of the rim of kind of a crappy margarita. That is the worst way to use salt in a cocktail. As soon as your lips or your tongue touch that glass, your taste buds are blown out. You're not going to appreciate anything that's actually in the glass, which is kind of the whole point. However, just like in our food, in our cocktails, salt heightens and elevates the other flavors. Now, we're not adding enough that it's going to taste briny or salty. That's not the goal here. The goal is to simply add just the barest hint of salt so that it heightens and brightens all the other flavors. It's just like when you're cooking. If you didn't salt your food, it's going to taste flat. Many times, cocktails also taste flat without that little hint of salt. And again, you're not going to actually taste the salt. At high-end bars, what you'll often see them do is use a dropper like this and add drops of saline solution. And that's a fine way to do it. It gives you a lot of control over it. But I find it works just as well to use maybe 6 or 10 granules of kosher salt. They mix up fine. You'll never see them. You'll never taste them. But they will brighten and lighten the cocktail. And it's a very different experience. And that's it. That's it for the apple cream pie. We're going to add some ice to the cocktail shaker. And now, the one thing you need to know is that when you are working with egg whites, it is important to two things. One, you need an acidic ingredient. The acidity of that ingredient helps emulsify the proteins in the egg whites. And in this case, the apple cider is playing that role. The second thing is you need to give it a slightly longer shake than you normally would. Like I say, I usually say 5, 6 seconds is plenty. I go 7 or 8 seconds with egg whites. And the reason for that is you, again, need to give those egg whites, the proteins in the egg whites, time to emulsify and give you that creamy viscosity that you want. And that is it. You strain that out. And you will see that you're going to get a nice frothy head on that cocktail. And it will be delicious and rich and creamy, yet light. And that is the apple cream pie. So cheers. That's really good. It tastes like the name. I mean, talk about language that you can taste. There you go.
That is really festive. That would be perfect for Thanksgiving coming up.
It would actually. You know, I'm a big fan of apple cider and bourbon in a combination for a cocktail for this time of year. I mean, cider obviously is seasonal, and bourbon loves it. Bourbon is naturally sweet anyway, and from the corn that's used to make it, and it plays off really well with the natural sweetness of the cider and the gentle acidity of the cider. It's a really great combination. And then in this case, the egg whites kind of round all that out, give it that kind of creaminess, that viscosity that, and I should say, when I mentioned viscosity, texture is something that we don't often consider with cocktails, but we really need to. Again, it's one of those simple things that elevate craft cocktails that we don't often think about at home, is the texture of a cocktail. We think it's liquid, right? How can it have texture? But actually, if you look at these 3 cocktails, there are 3 different textures at play. Obviously, the first one, the liquid crystal, has very little texture to it. Although actually it does have some texture, which is from the effervescence of the sparkling wine. When you think about those bubbles, that is a texture in your mouth. The second cocktail, the cinnamon toast, has the crushed ice, which gives it a distinctive texture. And then you have the creaminess of the egg whites in the apple cream pie, giving it a very different texture from the other 2 cocktails. So texture actually plays a really important role. We don't think about that in our beverages, but that is one of those simple things that is easily adjusted through cocktails that, again, elevates the experience of a basic cocktail to a craft cocktail.
We have a question here that is super relevant to pandemic times. It's from Glenda Hill, and she says that she and her friend like to FaceTime and have cocktails, have a happy hour 2 to 3 times a week. They live across the country from each other, and they'll usually be on FaceTime for 2 to 3 hours. And I know all of us now are on Zoom more, and we're doing, Zoom and FaceTime happy hours. But she says, do you have any suggestions about pacing? Because I feel like if we're all drinking on Zoom, like we could get a little drunk by the end of 2 hours without realizing it.
This is true. I suggest starting at 9 a.m. and just kind of cruising through. I mean, that's pacing, right? Um, so for pacing, yeah, that is an important thing. A part of it can be, there's a million different ways to approach this. And it, in many ways, depends on what you're drinking. And so I would say ice is a very good way to pace it. Now, again, you have to be careful with ice because dilution is important. And that's because the flavor compounds in liquor require a certain degree of dilution in order to open up and for our palates to be able to appreciate them. However, if you go beyond a certain point of dilution, obviously you're watering it down. Now, that said, if you are trying to pace yourself, you might want to use a little bit more ice. That's going to dilute it a little bit more. And if that dilution level doesn't bother you in terms of a taste experience, that's a very good way of slowing it down. The other way is to gravitate to what I would call like wine-based cocktails. And I actually have a chapter on these in my book, because wine has a much lower ABV, or alcohol by volume, than a hard liquor does. Most hard liquors are 40% or plus. And certainly whiskeys can be quite plus, plus, plus. And, but if you use wine, you're going to get more in the 14 to 16, 18%. And there are all sorts of ways, to use wine and different wines in cocktails. And so you're still having a cocktail experience, but you're kind of knocking down the ABV a little bit. There are all sorts of ways to do that. Sparkling wine is an excellent way of doing that, but there are all sorts of red wine cocktails that you can do, white wine cocktails. And the French 75, for example, has sparkling wine and a little bit of gin in it. That's a great choice, kind of, again, knock down some of the ABV a little bit. And I'm trying to think of what else. Like I have what I call the 30-second sangria, which is literally a sangria that you make in 30 seconds with, crappy red wine, a little bit of fruit juice, some bitters, and some a little bit of sugar, I think, and a little bit of citrus juice, and that's about it. And that's, again, it's a cocktail experience, and I should back up. I should say that a huge part of the joy of cocktails, and I think one of the things we're missing so much because of all being stuck at home, is the romance of the cocktail. Mm-hmm. And, I love going to great bars and sitting at the bar and absorbing the ambiance and talking to the bartender and learning and watching everything that's happening. That's a huge part of it. And so part of recreating that at home, is recreating the romance of it. And so if you're trying to slow down the alcohol consumption, which, we probably all could benefit from these days, is to retain the romance of it, retain the experience of it, but, just knock down the ABV of it a little bit. And so you could do that. Like a gin and tonic is a great way of doing that, because you can play with the proportions of a cocktail like that very easily. Like some cocktails are hard to play with the proportions of, like an old fashioned, for example, it's whiskey, whiskey, sugar, and some bitters, and that's about it. And so it's hard to play with the proportions of that. But a gin cocktail, like a gin and tonic, for example, that's very easy to play with the proportions of. I think mine is, I want to say it's 3 or 4 ounces of gin to 4 ounces of tonic water is my preferred proportion for a gin and tonic. But you could easily knock that down to 2.5 ounces of gin and 4 ounces of tonic water, throw some lime in there, and you've got a really nice cocktail experience. Again, you're preserving the romance of the cocktail, but you're not, getting wasted in the first hour. I think that's how I would do it, probably.
I've been doing a lot of these, and my tips are always make sure you have water nearby as well to hydrate.
Yes, that's true.
And there's nothing wrong with a cheese board to nibble on while you're drinking.
There we go. Absolutely. Yeah. Don't do it on an empty stomach. I have made that mistake too many times.
Me too. Let's see. We have so many good questions. Oh, here's a good one. So Jenny Kruger says she's just looking at the bottles on your kitchen counter, and she says, She's asking about brand choices of liquors. So if you have a cocktail that is more flavorful, maybe, and has other stronger ingredients, is going for a high-end liquor not as important because the other ingredients are going to kind of hide the taste of the crappy liquor?
Absolutely. Although I wouldn't use the word crappy. So I say that for most cocktails, stick to the mid shelf or even the upper lower shelf, if that makes any sense. Because I'm a bourbon drinker. I love a great high end bourbon. Love it. But I never use it in a cocktail because all the other ingredients are going to blow out the nuances that you're paying for in that top shelf bourbon. And so I am very happy actually with a mid shelf, or even I have found some pretty low shelf bourbons actually that make great cocktails. Again, depending on what you're doing with them, like my favorite cocktail that I go to every day is the Vieux Carré. It's a New Orleans cocktail, and it's rye, it is sweet vermouth, it's cognac and Benedictine with some bitters. And I drink one of those pretty much every day. I love them. It hits this beautiful, delicious spot between an old fashioned and a Manhattan. But why, with all that flavor going on, would I use a high end rye? You're going to lose all of that. And I use Bullet Rye most of the time for that, and which is a very respectable mid shelf rye, and is moderately priced. And I'm very happy with that. I also, for my bourbon cocktails, I tend to go with a mid to upper lower shelf bourbon if I'm mixing it. And if I'm gonna drink it neat, that's a very different equation. But for gin, there is such an amazing plethora of gins these days. I mean, 10 years ago, we were in a bourbon renaissance where there were millions of bourbons coming out, it felt like. And now we're in the gin renaissance where there are so many new gins coming out, and gins are actually easier to make than bourbons. They don't need to be aged, and they come out much more quickly. So all these distilleries are getting in on the action, and it's a great thing because there's so many different gins coming out, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to get a great gin for a good cocktail. Vodka is one that I would never spend a ton of money on. I would not buy. So I live in New Hampshire, which is a control state, which means, the state runs the liquor stores, and we can only buy what they choose to bring into the state. And there is this one horrendous vodka that they sell, and New Hampshire is known as the Granite State. There's this one vodka they sell that's called Granite State vodka, and I have no idea who's making it. I don't want to know why, but it's like $5 for a 2-gallon jug. I would not buy that. But I also would not go for top shelf vodka, because vodka, by definition, yes, I know there are nuances to it and you can appreciate them when you sip them, but we're not talking about sipping them. We're talking about using them in cocktails. And so something that is a very respectable upper lower to lower mid-range shelf is going to do just fine, because you're combining it with other ingredients that are going to be way more flavorful, and you're never going to appreciate what was actually in the vodka to begin with. If you are a vodka fan or aficionado and you want to sip vodkas neat, then yeah, sure, go for the top shelf stuff. And you will detect nuances, but all of those nuances are lost in cocktails. So I always say, save your money on those sorts of liquors for stuff you want to drink neat. And we each kind of have our own thing that we're willing or want to drink neat. I drink whiskey neat, and so I will put the money into those bourbons and ryes that I want to drink neat. I was turned on to sipping tequilas, and so I have a very nice bottle of sipping tequila, but I would never use that in a cocktail. And, for the most part, I would say you can very happily spend $20 to $25 to a bottle for your kind of core liquors. Vodka will be even less, actually. And sometimes bourbon can be even less. But for the most part, and rum, I should take that back, half of them are even less. Rum is also generally very much cheaper. And I'm actually very happy with, Bacardi white rum in a cocktail. You don't need to spend a lot of money. I would say most of your core bottles will cost between $15 and $25, $27 a bottle. And where you want to put your money is on your kind of specialty bottles. And those are kind of your liqueurs, which are, again, like I said before, bringing not just like sweetness, but are bringing a lot of flavor to the game. And so, like the ginger liqueur or the liqueur 43 or orange liqueur, although orange liqueur is quite inexpensive. I don't think the ginger liqueur is very expensive. I want to say that's like $25 a bottle. I think the liqueur 43 is about the same. Benedictine is another one that's probably about, I think it's like $24, at least here in New Hampshire. And so you're not going to spend a lot of money. When you're mixing flavors and when you're building cocktails, you are looking for the end result, not for each individual component, so to speak. And so you have a little bit more wiggle room.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When my husband and I got married, you serve the good wine for the first hour or so.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because no one knows what it tastes like after a couple hours at a wedding.
Exactly. It's fine. You're all dancing and everybody's having fun. It doesn't much matter at that point.
Exactly. Okay, my last question for you, I think, will be, do you have a favorite cocktail from the book? And if so, what is it?
Oh, it is the Vieux. It's the one I mentioned before. That is my daily drinker. I fell in love with it in London. And so I've said, I think a couple times, I am an old-fashioned drinker. I am a pre-prohibition style old-fashioned drinker. So I'll give a very brief history lesson here. The old-fashioned predates prohibition. And back in the day, it was nothing more than bourbon or rye with a sugar cube muddled with some bitters. That was it. And when prohibition struck and we were forced to drink bathtub whiskey, or God help us, Canadian whiskey, we had to cover up the taste of the whiskey. And so what bartenders started doing was adding fruit to it. And they added a lot of fruit and a lot more fruit. And eventually it became known as basically fruit cocktail with some whiskey dumped on it. And after Prohibition, the cocktail never quite recovered. It always kind of had this fruity, memory to it. And bartenders to this day, if you go to a bad bar or if you ask for a cocktail at a place where they're not really trained mixologists, you are going to get cherries and oranges and apples and whatever thrown into your old fashioned. That is not an old fashioned, at least not in my book. I drink a pre-prohibition style old fashioned, which is just kind of the bare minimum. I was in London, I don't know, a year and a half ago or so, and I went to the American bar at the Savoy Hotel, which is one of the best bars in the world. It was long, I think continues to be one of the top 5 bars in the world. I actually went in with very low expectations because it's not far from Trafalgar Square. And I thought, okay, it's gonna be a tourist trap. And I sat down at the bar and the bartender very astutely said, "What do you drink?" And I said, "Well, I'm an old fashioned drinker, but I don't want an old fashioned. I want something different." And he offered me a Vieux Carré. And it completely blew my mind. Like I say, it's this, I love a Manhattan too, but this drink straddles the line between old fashioned and Manhattan, but adds these wonderful herbal sweet notes to it. And it is like having a wood fire in front of you, a warm blanket around your shoulders, and just this like boozy, wonderful comfort in your hand. And I drink, like I say, I probably have one a day, and I sometimes two. And it is a potent cocktail, and it is closing in on 4 ounces of liquor. But it is so delicious and so wonderful. And the recipe in the book actually is very true to what I had in London. The difference is, so it's the liquors again are rye, 1 ounce of rye, 1 ounce of cognac, 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, and 3/4 of an ounce of Benedictine. And then you add Angostura bitters. And then in the book, I use orange bitters, but tradition is Peychaud's bitters. But either is delicious. You stir it with ice, you strain it, and that's it. Nothing more complicated than that. I love that one. Highly recommend it. If you are a whiskey drinker or an old fashioned or a Manhattan drinker, I really highly recommend that.
This was so much fun. I wish all of my events could have
Yeah.
cocktails.
I wish I could have shared some of these with you. I mean, I have so many drinks now to finish.
For the next book, hopefully things will be different and we can do a tasting next time.
That would be very nice.
Um, Thank you all for joining us. This was such a fun Friday. If you make any of these drinks, whether tonight or this weekend, please share them with us. Tag Politics and Prose. We would love to share them. Like I said before, this is the perfect holiday gift, but you don't have to just get it for a friend. I got one for myself, and then I've already bought 2 others for other friends. So definitely get it for yourself for your own bar cart. And I learned a lot today. I hope you guys did too. And got a little buzzed while you were at it.
Well, I mean, that's what we're here for, right?
Exactly. So everyone, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Keep making your drinks, drinking your drinks. Stay well and stay well read.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming, and please drink up and feel free to seek me out online if you have any questions.